Welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's video we're going to be installing our LED strips and our LED matrices into our virtual pinball cabinet. I'm super excited, so let's get going. So the last video I put out for you guys was being able to check your LED strips and make sure your LED matrix work 100% of the time before you start cutting them up and putting them into your virtual pinball cabinet. That way if something's wrong you can return them. And you don't have to struggle with, oh my God, I screwed up these because I cut them, or my DOF's not working properly, when all it is a bad matrix. So I highly recommend you go watch that. I'll put the link to the video above so you can go see that. The other thing is you have to get your Octo and your Teensy all soldered together and working, so that's in that video as well. Now, putting addressable LED strips on your virtual pinball cabinet is a highly custom thing to do. In fact, you don't even need to do it. But if you are going to do it, you have all kinds of options. You could just put them down the side of the playfield. You could add a matrix in the back to fill in the gap. That's a pretty good idea. You can put them in the speaker grills. You can put them under the cabinet, behind the back box. You can even put them around the legs if you wanted. Lots of cool custom stuff to do. So what I'm going to show you is how I tackle it. It may not be exactly how you're going to do your cabinet because of a whole bunch of things. Your width of your cab is different. You have less of a gap. You put your monitor right up to where the glass is and things like that. So just keep that in mind as we go forward here. I'm going to show you how I do it. You may have to do it a little different, but about 95% of everything I'm going to do is something everyone's going to have to do. So I'm going to start this process off by designing and building the board that's going to hold my LED matrices at the back and fill in this gap. So a really cheap and easy way to do this is get yourself some thin cardstock and just start making yourself a template. That way you can kind of fit it in there and see that it fits nice. So for example, for me, once I hide the TV bezel, it's got a nice kind of angled back. I go back and actually play the pinball from the front and see if that's what I like. So I think this looks pretty good. So I've settled on a 4-inch height, and then I want it to be the width of the cab minus probably about a 1/16. That way it's not super tight. So 1/16 off of 25 inches. So I'm gonna go cut that board and then we'll go on from there. All right, so you can see I fit that in here. However, because it's 3/4 inch thick, it's kind of sitting up and coming away from the monitor at the front edge, and I'm not really a fan of that. So I think I'm gonna go to the table saw, set it to like 15, 20 degree angle, and cut just off the end without taking away the 4 inches and seeing if that'll kind of go in a little bit better. Cool, I did a 15 degree angle on the end and it stayed just a little bit away from the edge so it didn't chip out, and that actually fits great. I can get it going right to the silver bezel on the monitor. And then when I put in my tinted acrylic that I went and got cut from a plastic shop for literally $5 each, and I ended up, since it was so cheap, I ended up getting the 2 different tints, so one's a little darker so I can try which one I like. Once that fits in there, that will be perfectly hiding the bezel right to where the pixels show up on the back. So that looks like that'll work. Cool, on to the next step. So the next step is getting a little pocket machined into this board so that we can lay this matrix down into the board. And there'll be some raised sides here to kind of hold it in place where it needs to be. And then when we put the tinted acrylic piece on top, it'll kind of hold it in place. So all you really got to do is measure the width of the board, so 4 inches. Measure the width of your matrix, so this is 3 1/8. minus the 2, so that's leaving me 7/8. Divide that by 2, and that gives you the size of these on the sides. So what is that? That's 7/16. And then for how deep that pocket's going to go, you just measure the height of this, which is 1/16. So if we go 3/32, that'll give just a little bit of clearance on it, and yet get these down all the way. So let me show you how we're going to do this pocket. First off, we're going to lower the blade so it's only 3/32 up off the table. Okay, and then set your fence to roughly the middle of the board. And take a cut. Okay, and once you've confirmed your depth of cut is what you want, all you're going to do is unlock the fence and just creep it over a little bit, like 2-3 millimeters. Lock it again, run it on one side, and then turn it around and run it at the same setting. And what you're doing is you're just moving over the saw blade so that the width or the kerf of the blade will take another notch on both sides, and it's even because you've done it against the fence on both sides. And all you do is you keep repeating that process till you get to that size that you want on the edges. Okay, on your last couple cuts, just carefully sneak up to it so you get the size you want, yet it's not kind of bowed or anything, right? You can get it to fit right in there nicely. One more pass. All right, that sits right in there nicely. Perfect. All right, cool, that little channel is all done. Now, a couple things. I'm using a super dull blade and a super thin kerf, so it took a lot more cuts, and it kind of, because it was so dull, it even has little rounded corners. So there's little kind of lines in here and left a little bit of kind of overlap. That also might have been from me trying to step over too much at a time. However, it's in there. You just have to take a little wood chisel and kind of just scrape off the extra and all these little loose bits, and that'll come off. And I don't really care what the surface is underneath because it's getting covered with an LED matrix and that tinted acrylic, so it doesn't really matter. Now, other ways to do this, if you didn't like how I showed you there, you could take a router, set yourself up a little jig, router this out. Other things you could do is go with a thinner piece of wood, maybe a piece of 5/8 plywood instead, and then just make some little 3/8 or 1/4 inch little blocks that you can glue and brad nail on there. It's the same thing, so whatever you want to do. The next step is to figure out where the holes need to go in this panel so that these wires can come out the back. So what you're going to do is flip this over, lay it in your channel, and figure it exactly centered where you want it to be. If you're going to have some extra 8x8 matrices, you just put those in as well and center everything. Then you're going to take a pencil and just lay out where the center of this little wire collection is. Just make these little marks. Then take a ruler and measure from the edge of the matrix to the center of these wires. And then when you're done, you'll have a whole bunch of locations that you can center punch and use a hole saw and drill through. Now, because I am up in Canada and I'm trying to order parts and make this as budget and as cheap as possible, when I went to order these really nice BTF style matrices, they did have the 8x8s that were the same brand, and I wanted to make sure I had the same brand so that the colors matched. The 8x8s, to fill this in a bit more, was almost as much as these panels. So there's no way I was going to order another 3 or possibly 4 of those 8x8s at that price. So what this crazy guy did is I ordered 2 of the 8x32s. Now we're going to see if that's a problem, but I think it's going to be amazing because it's going to fill in this entire panel here. Now there is an issue with that. And the issue is that if I have one of these panels right flush with the end, it's a little bit too long because I have to space this out so it's got the same spacing, and I end up with almost a full LED hanging off the side that's got nowhere to go. So what I'm going to do, I originally thought I could maybe just cut this, but looking at this, and I don't want to risk one of these getting broke, it looks like the wires for the signal and everything come back to somewhere here on the panel. So if I cut off the end, I might lose that. So what I'm going to do instead is I had an idea that I could use DOF to basically tell the matrix that it's going to be 1 column less, either from the beginning or the end. So what I'm going to do is basically just cut out a little notch in this board and very carefully bend this last column of LEDs down in a bit and glue gun it into this little kind of board in that spot so that you won't see that. And then in DOF, I'll tell it not to light up that panel as well. And then I'm going to have a full LED matrix. So that'll be pretty cool. So let's lay this out and drill these holes. Got a hole saw that's going to clear all these wires and let it sit down properly. Man, if somebody could invent how to do an auto-ejecting hole saw, so you don't have to do this, be a very rich person. Moving on to drilling holes in this pre-cut tinted acrylic plexiglass that's going to cover up our matrix so that we don't actually see anything except the bright lights coming out, and that's also going to help with a bit of the glare coming off those lights. Now, I've already got 4 holes laid out here. I might put 2 more in the center depending later if it's vibrating or it needs it. Now, there are some tricks to drilling holes in acrylic so that you don't crack it, and here they are. Do not lay holes very close to the edge, otherwise it's going to crack. I would stay a minimum twice the thickness of the material away from the sides. So this is 1/8, so no holes within 1/4 of an inch. Other things, you can put a strip of masking tape over top of this. That'll kind of keep the drill where you want it instead of it wandering off, and it will also prevent the chipping from happening. When you drill, put a backer piece of wood underneath so that you're supporting the plastic underneath when you go through. Speed, the RPM of your drill should be around 100 to 500 RPM, so relatively slow. Otherwise you're going to transfer a ton of heat into this and it will grab really aggressively too. Now, one of the other things that I can tell you is on your actual drill bit yourself, we don't want a huge back angle. So if you look at your drill bit, there's kind of like a cutting edge. The angle that comes back away from it, that's where the material is going to go. And normally that's about 10-15 degrees. However, if we have it that much when we're drilling plastic, it has a tendency to grab and pull itself in, which is going to chip your board. So try to get that about 1 or 2 degrees back angle. You can actually buy plastic drills for this. The other thing is we don't really want this crazy sharp. So drill a couple holes in a piece of metal, kind of dulls the edges a little bit, and then you should be good to go. Other tips, don't go pushing pretty hard. Just take your time, let the drill bit do its work, and shouldn't be a problem. So let's drill these holes. Make sure you don't tighten these down too hard, eh? If you tighten them too much, you're going to crack the acrylic as well. So be careful with that. Oh yeah, look at that. You guys are looking at it from kind of like a player point of view. I think that looks absolutely amazing. So let's get this out and I'll show you how we're going to attach this to the cabinet. So looking at this panel from the back side, I'm going to attach these magnetic door catches. And so what I'm going to do is screw in the metal steel piece, one on either end of this panel. Then I'm going to orient this how it would be in the cabinet. So this is where the cabinet would go. So I'll put that down. Put it near the edge, and then when I put this panel back in to place it exactly where I want it, all I've got to do is take my pencil and from the sides here just lay out the slot for the top and bottom screw holes, take it out and then pre-drill for the screw holes, mount this part into the sides of the cabinet and then put it back in and just double check everything's good. And I may have bought a version of these that are too much power. I think these are 30-pound magnets, so it's probably way overkill, but I also don't want this thing moving around a lot. So we'll see if that bites me in the butt too. this is going to be a little bit of a pain in the ass. Wasn't able to get my pencil in there to fully mark it. So what I've done is put the top one in the middle, lined it up with just the edge I was able to get because this monitor was in the way. And now that I've got the slot, I got a spot to drill and put the hole in. Worst case, there is a little bit of movement on this, so fine adjustment to get that angle exactly how I want it on the front. Okay, and then do the same thing on the other side. Uh-oh, we're hitting on the TV on the bottom side of the magnet. Those magnets are too big. Let's see, maybe we can trim a little bit of the bezel off the TV. Shorten the magnet up, we'll have to figure out something under here. All right, it's a little minor hiccup. The edge of this magnet is hitting the edge of our monitor. So I figured instead of hacking into the monitor, I would just hack off a little bit off the magnet. There should be still lots of strength in this. So what I ended up doing is taking a grinder and cutting so that there was still a couple millimeters of this holding this kind of area around the magnet, holding that together. I used a grinding wheel zip disc, but you could use a hacksaw, really anything would cut it. And I cut that tab off, and then what you're left with is kind of, you can take a look at the assembly. I needed to have another hole because I just cut that tab off. So when I started drilling, it started pushing the guts out, and that's okay because I will show you literally what it does. So you're going to take this part out. There's your magnet, and there's your other tab. So put these tabs back in here, minus the magnet. Put a piece of wood in here, put it in a vise, and drill a hole near the edge so you can have a screw on this end of the magnet. And then when you're all done, just take a file or a grinder and deburr the edges and clean it all up and make sure there's no swarf in there. And then simply just take it all apart. And in my case, this magnet was actually extending over the hole. So all I did is I put a little bit of the end in a vise and then just kind of bent it, and it just snaps off. It's actually quite brittle. And it takes a little bit of the magnetism away, but not that much. This is still pretty powerful. And it just clears the hole. So then what you have to do is just put it back together. So this little tab here goes up into the hole. Put one in first, then put your magnet. Make sure your magnet's not covering up the hole. And then put this one in here, like that, and you are back in business. You can put a screw through there. So that's what I did to fix it on my machine. Cool, magnets are in. So now this piece to go in just slides in. It's a very snug fit. Look at it, it just snaps right into the magnets. Look at that. Perfect. Now, there is no holes here to be able to get this out. So if you need to get it out, you just got to put your hand up through the back panel and scoot it out that way first. And then you can get it out to work on it. Sweet, on to the next thing. All right, so we're gonna take a little detour here because in order to finish this panel off, I need to know where the holes are here going to be so that I can get my wires for my side LED addressable strips to go through it. So we're gonna take a look at our addressable strips now on the side. Now, this is going to differ depending on what you have for your build. For me, I've got a 10-year-old TV with almost an inch bezel that can't be removed. So I originally thought I would just stick this LED addressable strip right in the middle of that. And what I'm going to probably do is put a covering on here to hide the gap, as well as make this prettied up a little bit so I don't see all these screw holes and things that are in this bezel. Now, if you have a new TV, there may be a very tiny bezel, and it might be perfectly fit just to this strip so that you can put it along the edge. That way you can lift it up and down and it kind of hides the bezel. Some of you may not even want that on the TV at all, so you might do some pre-planning ahead, router out a groove in the actual sides of your cabinet, and then you can put this LED strip into the sides of the cabinet deep enough that if you put any kind of diffuser or tinted plexi over top of that, that it doesn't interfere with the movement of the playfield going up and down. So, like I said, everything's going to be different depending on your build. I can only show you what I'm going to do with mine, so let me show you what I'm going to use. So what I'm doing to cover up the bezels on my TV is I went to my local hardware store and I looked in all the sections where there would be kind of like carpeting and flooring and vinyl and the woodworking sections. And what you're doing is looking for edging or banding or floor kind of inserts and things like that. And what I ended up finding is this piece right here. It's got a little 90-degree kind of lip on it, which is perfect, so that this will go on the gap between the monitor and the sides of the cabinet, so it locks it in position this way. And then it's a bit wide this way, 1.5 inches, and this spot here is going to cover up that bezel. So all I really need to do is put it right up to my new panel I just made, figure out a decent length so that it's underneath my lockdown bar, trim it to length, and then I'm going to have to take this to a table saw and cut this down to the proper width, and then sand it up, give it some paint, and then we got that piece done. All right, if you're going to cut some aluminum on your table saw, there's some things you need to know about. Now, first off, all of the woodworking safety still applies. It's just the consequences are multiplied, because if you're going to get a kickback and you're standing behind it, you're getting a chunk of sharp metal coming at you instead. So make sure it's flat on the table, make sure it's against the fence, safety guards down, etc. Now, I would not cut any aluminum thin stuff, so some sheet stock. About the thinnest I would cut on a table saw is maybe 1/16 of an inch, maybe even up to 1/8 of an inch. You'll find that the machine just kind of sucks it in, and it usually kind of just damages the flatness and the shape of the surface you're trying to cut and make look pretty anyway. The other thing is aluminum likes to stick to spinning stuff unless you lubricate it. So what I would do ahead of time is get some dry lubricant, like a paraffin block, or whatever you use to lubricate your slides on your table saw. That'll work. Just pre-put it on the piece you're cutting before you start. Now, don't go fast with your cuts, go nice and slow. And also make sure that your blade has the little carbide bits that have been brazed onto the actual blade itself. That way you know this thing's gonna be able to cut aluminum. All right, here we go. Let's trim these down. All right, I'm not gonna lie to you, that was a little bit sketchy, and the reason why is this material here is at that hard limit. Like for me, 1/16 of an inch. I was able to do it, and it turned out okay, but it's a bit sketchy. And the reason why is, as I'm trying my best to keep this flat on the table and against the fence, it's cut no problem, but when it gets to the other side of the blade is kind of catching on this thin material. It's a little soft, and it's kind of starting to lift it up a bit. And if it was a bit thicker, it wouldn't be doing that. So I had to kind of switch up real quick and use my push stick to kind of help keep it down where that blade was. So sometimes it's not just knowing what to do, it's a little bit of confidence too, right? If this seems squeamish and you're not able to do this, maybe this is a candidate for just finding the right thickness at the store instead of buying something a bit bigger. So next thing, just go take a file and deburr this and make it look all pretty. That looks pretty good. All right, cool. Let me show you what goes on top of this then. At this point, we're putting our LED addressable strips down to this piece, but there's a couple suggestions for you. First off, make sure this stuff is really clean, because you're gonna basically peel back a sticker and put it down. Now, when you peel back the protective film on the sticker backing, if you can see the contacts, like the little copper pads and the circuitry underneath, that's way too thin. You're gonna end up having some contact issues where the electricity is going into that aluminum. So at a minimum, get yourself some double-sided tape or a strip of masking tape to put some of a buffer in between that. Now, I have the same issue that I had with the LED matrix. I don't really want to see all these LEDs and all the circuitry, so I kind of went and blew the budget a little bit, mostly because I couldn't find just the amount of pieces that I needed, but I ended up finding these Musata diffuser strips. And essentially what it is it's a aluminum channel that you can put your LED strip down into. And then once you've got it down there, they come in different types. They've got the clear, So you're going to see everything really bright, and it's just more of a protective film. Or they have kind of like an opaque, it diffuses the light a bit better. So instead of seeing individual lights, you'll kind of blend it into one light. And then you can also get the tinted versions, which is kind of what I'm trying to go with this theme here, so that you don't see them all the time unless they're lit up. So that's what I went with, and like I said, they were really pricey, and I wish you could buy them just like piece at a time, but you had to buy a 10-pack, so it was like well over $100. But I'm hoping this is going to make it look a lot professional and well worth the purchase. So let's figure out where these are going to go. Now, where you place this diffuser is really up to you for personal preference. For me, I'm going to go right in the center. However, I wish these were just a touch longer, like even an inch, because if I put this right against that LED matrix panel, you can see I got a gap here where I'm going to see the wires and stuff. So I'm kind of thinking personally that I should put it so that when you're playing pinball, you don't see the wires going under the lockdown bar, so roughly like that, which leaves me about half an inch before that LED panel. So maybe I'll have to cover up some wires with some black shrink wrap so it's not so visible. Now, these channels do come with these little brackets that you can drill or screw this into something. However, I can't drill and screw into my TV monitor, and this aluminum piece that I just put in here isn't thick enough. So I could glue it down, but I think the best bet, in case I want to remove this in the future, is put a strip of some double-sided tape on here and clean this piece off really well and very carefully place that right in the center. Man, that double-sided tape is pretty strong. Cool. Gave her a couple pennies. I'm going to put another strip of this double-sided tape in the bottom just for some added insulation. In my case, this is the right side of the playfield, so I want the data going out this way. So you just make sure that the arrow is going to the right way when you put your strip down. All right, cool. Well, there's pretty much one ready to go, and now I know where I've got my hole locations to drill. Now, a couple of you are probably thinking, man, is he gonna leave that shiny? I'm actually gonna paint this flat black when I paint some other stuff. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, you're gonna have to take that strip off and take your LED strips so you don't paint it, right? Well, there is a protective film on this actual diffuser, so I'm thinking that when I'm ready, I'll spray paint it, and just before it dries, I'll peel back that, and that'll take that paint off there. Now, I can see these LED strips quite visibly, so I'm not sure. I was kind of hoping that'd be a darker tint. We'll see how bad it looks on the cabinet. I can always take that off, and you can get automotive tinting spray paint, and you can do a couple coats and as dark as you want. So that might be something down the road that I do to make this a little darker. We'll just have to see. Left and right addressable strips are now in, and now it's time to figure out where we're going to put those holes in that matrix panel. So a little hard to mark acrylic and see it on tinted, so I'm going to use some strips of masking tape and then lay it out with a pencil where these wires are going to go through so that I can drill and Dremel a hole in the edge of that panel. Now, it would be nice to have a super, super tiny kind of hole for just the wires to go through. However, that connector has to get through as well, so I'll probably have to measure this and go just a touch bigger than that. That way I can actually pull the side panels out, disconnect the power, rather than have to take the panel out the front to be able to get them out. All right, changed my mind while I was dremeling out that little notch. I am just going to do a notch for just the wires there for a couple of reasons. First one is I don't want some big gaping hole that I'm going to see from the other end of the pinball cabinet, just so I can get a connector in and out. That's kind of ridiculous. Worst case, I just open up the back access panel, push out the LED matrix panel, lift it up, and then this comes out. Now, because I have to do that, I will also be able to get the benefit of holding down the wires and hence holding down these LED panel strips, so I don't have to worry about them moving around. I'm pretty happy with that. From the back, you can see there's a little gap, but it's all black, and then once this cabinet's painted black, it's gonna blend right in. And then if we zoom up into the front, looking kind of straight down, you can see it looks nice like that. And then as we go up, from the player's point of view, you can't even see that, especially once that's all painted black in the cabinet. Moving on to the LED lights behind the speaker grills. Now, some of you might be wondering, why am I not talking about the wiring as I go? And the reason why is I want to put everything in.